Greetings. I am talking to my fellow saints, my brethren and my sisters in the Lord. And I have a question for you. In case, some of you haven't learned it by now, I am here. Part of my purpose is to challenge you. Part of my purpose is to equip you. And for those who want to grow in the Lord, I am a great friend. But for those who are just interested in being complacent and not growing, I'm not very liked. And that's okay. But I have a question for you. I want to ask you, are you, and I'm asking myself this question too, hear me, are we striving? Are we striving to trust and therefore obey Jesus Christ? Because you cannot separate trust and obedience. You can't separate faith and obedience. They go together. If you have faith, you will obey. If you trust God, you will obey Him. There's this prevailing idea that is out there in the church world today that you can believe in Jesus and you can have faith in Him, but obedience, it's not so important. This is an error, to say the least, and a lie at worst. And that's putting it nicely. So I'm going to ask you again, are we striving to trust and therefore obey Jesus Christ? Consider what Jesus said in the Gospel of Luke. I cannot remember off the top of my head what chapter it's in right now, but he said, he responded to a question that was put forth to him by Peter, I believe. Peter said, "Lord, are there few who are saved?" And Jesus' response was this: strive to enter in at the strait gate. For many, I say to you, will seek to enter in and will not be able. That's a very sobering thought. And you all know the famous scripture in Matthew chapter 7, where Jesus says, "Enter through the narrow gate. For wide is the gate, and broad is the path which leadeth to destruction, and many there be which go in thereat. Because the reason, straight is the gate, and narrow is the way which leads to life, and few there be that find it." Consider the fact that the majority, the masses, are walking on the broad road, the big wide path of destruction. And then there's this narrow way, the straight way, that few are walking upon. The road less traveled. Now that word which Jesus said to Peter, strive to enter in at the strait gate. That word strive in the Greek literally means to agonize. Agonismo, agonize to the point of death. This is a very arduous, a hard thing to do. But he says to do it, to strive, to agonize, even to the point of death, to enter in at that strait gate. Now, what is that strait gate? It is surely trusting Jesus Christ. Because I'm going to tell you, and you already know this, hopefully, and if you don't, you will surely discover it if indeed you are committed to following the Lord. To trust Christ brings about great agonismo sometimes. You will agonize. You will find it difficult at times because to trust Him in many ways and at many times causes you to go very much contrary to your natural mind and to your natural tendencies. And this brings about some level of suffering inside of you. It's called self-denial. It's called taking up your cross and denying yourself. It's called death to the flesh. To trust Christ sometimes will go against the very grain of your natural carnal man. And it should, because God and the flesh are contrary to one another. The flesh is an enemy of God. It is not subject to the law or the ways of God. It's contrary to them. So then, as it says in Romans 8, those who are in the flesh cannot please God. That's why it also says in Hebrews 11, without faith, it is impossible to please God. If you're not walking in faith, you're walking in the flesh. If you're walking in the flesh, you're not walking in obedience to the Lord. You cannot have obedience without being in faith. You cannot obey God without faith. And if you're trying to obey God without faith, you've got these are dead works, the works of the flesh. Faith without works is dead. But I want you to understand also that works without faith is dead also. So are we striving to trust and therefore obey Jesus Christ? In John chapter 6, after Jesus had multiplied 5 barley loaves of bread and 2 small fish into enough to feed upwards of 5,000 individuals out in the wilderness, there was a group of people who began to follow after him, not because they realized his deity, not because they realized who he really was, but because they could gain some earthly, carnal thing from him. And, he rebuked them and said, do not labor for the meat which perishes. Do not labor only for earthly things. Do not make those things your objective and your goals. Do not live for them as if they are the most important thing, because they're not. But he said this, to labor, to strive for the meat which does not perish, which I will give you, said Jesus Christ. And they said to him, all right, what shall we do that we may work the works of God? And Jesus said, this is the work of God, that you believe in him whom he has sent. I want you to understand this reality. To believe Jesus Christ is work. It is laborious at times. Because as I stated before, there is something inside of you that is utterly contrary to the ways of God. And to believe God and to trust God, to believe on him at times, will cause this friction inside your soul. Because your flesh will want to go this way, and God is leading you in the right way. And so there is labor involved in faith. And I'm here asking you today, are we striving to trust and therefore obey Jesus Christ? Are we setting our face like a flint? Are we hardening ourselves to go after and follow Jesus? Have we made that commitment that no matter what, I'm going to trust him? I'm going to trust him for everything, for my eternal salvation, for the renewal of my mind, for the prosperity of my circumstances, the preservation of my children and of my life. Am I going to trust him to bring about his will and his purposes and his goodness in my life? Am I going to trust him to help me? Or am I going to take things into my hands and plot and scheme and manipulate and try to make things come to pass in my own intellect and in my own strength? That's easy, to take things from God's hand and try to work it out after your own methods. That's easy. But it produces destruction. It produces hardship. What is very difficult is to trust God. But the more you trust God, the more you learn his goodness and his ways, the easier it will become over time. So, are you striving to trust and therefore obey Jesus Christ?